Hello and welcome to CHGO Fire. Well, the Fire is still kind of bad at home, but hey, Philip Zinckernagel is really good, so that's fun to talk about. Also about to be joined by Tyler Terens to talk Fire, Gold Cup, MLS, everything. It's a packed show here on CHGO Fire. This is CHGO Fire, presented by Sunnyside. Visit sunnyside.shop for bright buys every day, including 50% off your first 3 online purchases when you enter promo code HICHGO at checkout to qualify. Exclusions apply. Sunnyside Cannabis Dispensary, bright buys every day, only for 21 and over or Illinois medical card holders. Hey everybody, thanks for watching on YouTube or listening wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Alex Campbell, and I am thrilled to be joined again on the show, a repeat guest off the top, by someone you can see on MLS Season Pass, including this past weekend's Fire game, Fox Sports with their coverage of the Gold Cup. You can hear him on Sirius XM FC 157 on occasion as well. One of the busiest men in soccer right now, Tyler Terens. Welcome back to CHGO Fire.
Glad to be here. It's been a little bit, but always a pleasure to be talking to you and be on this channel, and pumped to have a little talk about everything soccer underneath the sun right now, which seems like literally anything you could possibly discuss. International club, Chicago, Philip Zinckernagel, Dave Matthews Band going on in the background of Soldier Field this weekend. So pumped to talk about it all.
Yeah, it's certainly a packed schedule to say the least. I do want to start though with the weekend you just had. What for you would you say was more emotionally taxing? The Canada-Guatemala penalty kick shootout, or watching the Fire try to hold that 3-2 lead after giving up 2 goals in the space of like 2 minutes?
I'm going to say the Canada-Guatemala game, because my body and my psyche is now quite used to watching Chicago struggle after taking an early lead. That's something that I'm just sort of used to. You know, if you've seen it once, you can be prepared to see it the second, third, fourth, and 17th time. But I was thinking to myself today, watching a couple of guys talk about the Canada and Guatemala game, and then previewing the U.S. men's national team semifinal against Guatemala. That Canada-Guatemala game, in terms of like games I've called, top 3 easily in terms of like the energy of the crowd, the nature of the upset, penalty kick shootout, the drama. It was special, man. It was a really, really fun call.
Yeah, and it's also cool, I think, to see guys like Rubio Rubin, Aaron Herrera, guys who are former U.S. youth internationals who might have, I don't know if both of them have January camp experience, but I think they both do. And to see then those guys take their form from their clubs and bring that into that game, that's a really cool moment for them. And now it sets up this really interesting game against the U.S. on Wednesday night. Off air, before we started, you and I were talking about the crazy travel schedule you've been on lately. How would you describe the way you've had to manage, your normal MLS Apple schedule that you're on here for the season with Kendra D. St. Aubin as your co-pilot, with the work you've been doing in the Gold Cup, and how that's had you jetting all over the place?
So strangely enough, like I didn't have to miss or really like change anything for the MLS, because there was that built-in Players Association break for Gold Cup. So I was, away doing Gold Cup 8 games in 8 days, and I just simply had MLS games on either side, and what ultimately made an MLS and Gold Cup sandwich. And then after I was done with my 8th game in the group stage, I wasn't scheduled to do a knockout round game. And then they asked me to come back and do a quarterfinal for whatever reason. So that just simply meant on the back end of my Minnesota game on a Wednesday and Chicago game against Charlotte on Saturday, that I would travel back to LA Sunday morning to call the quarterfinal from LA in the studios on Sunday afternoon, and then take the red eye home, because my fiance was about to divorce me before we even got married for being away for 2 weeks, while our house is currently undergoing some renovations after a tree fell on the house. So I needed to get home,
of course.
But luckily nothing changed, and I just simply had to be prepared for everything. And I started my Gold Cup prep weeks ago, basically as soon as the preliminary rosters came out, and that sort of allowed me to be able to just call the games in stride and just focus on one game at a time.
Yeah, I mean, you threw it in there, but congratulations as well on the engagement because,
Thank
your
you.
life just needed more busyness and more big things going on. So that's all very exciting. Something, not on that level of excitement, but certainly it's been more interesting this season. You talked about, you're used to seeing the Fire struggle to hold a lead. And, we're getting toward, roughly this halfway point now of year one under Greg Berhalter. So I'm curious, as a guy who, you're familiar with this team and you've gotten to call a few of their games this season. From your perspective, where you are now, as somebody who's on a more national level, what's kind of been your overall takeaways from the work you've seen Greg do so far this season, and watching this team as compared to years past?
This is clearly by far the best attacking version of the Chicago Fire that we've seen in the past 5 years, hands down. Right? I mean, even going back to 2019 when Nikolic was scoring goals left and right, and even years before that with David Accam, like I would argue that this attacking version of the Chicago Fire is the best that they've seen since they made the playoffs in 2017, maybe even before that. Philip Zinckernagel for me is a top 3 attacker in the league in terms of every time I watch him play, his stamp on the game is so blatantly obvious, and he shows up every single game, and he's always running downhill. He's always challenging defenders. He's always got them on their heels. So for that, I think that Greg's done an incredible job, and they're scoring some really, really pretty, fun, typical Greg Berhalter goals, in similar or even evolutionized fashion from what we saw from the Columbus Crew days before he took over the U.S. men's national team. Now, the other side of that is the defensive side of the ball, obviously. And I think that moving on from Rafa Schihos, bringing in Jack Elliott, dealing with yet another injury-laden season for Carlos Terens. I mean, how many times have we said that since 2020?
Every year it's the same thing. He plays great for 4 or 5 games. There's transfer talk, and then there's a bad injury, and we'll see you next February to do it all over again.
And for me, at some point, you have to just move on, and even if it's not a sale, right? Because you've basically been riding this roller coaster with him for 4 or 5 years, and it hasn't yielded anything other than inconsistency. And I'm not just talking about his play, but I'm also talking about the inconsistency that Greg talks to us about in terms of who's my center back pairing? Is it Chris Cupps? Is it Sam Rogers? Is it Jack Elliott? Who is it? We don't know. Is it Mauricio Pineda? How many times has he done that before? So and outside of that, I also think that, Barroso constantly being injured and really not getting a good run of games this year has not been helpful. I mean, he was arguably one of the best players on the field a couple games ago. So I just think that some injuries and stuff like that, but Fire fans have heard that for long enough. I don't need to say that. Bringing in Jack Elliott at that point in his career, I liked the move, and I think the idea was right from Greg to pair him with Carlos and give him that solidified MLS veteran next to him. Mm-hmm. But that was expecting Carlos to be healthy, which cannot be the expectation anymore if anybody's been watching this show. So, the defensive side of the ball needs a lot of work. Again, I think that what everybody needs to keep in mind as a Fire fan, and I'm not an employee of the team anymore, so I don't need to sugarcoat this in a way so that I am fearful of not getting paid this week, is that there's a new coach and a new sporting director taking over. It's going to take a little bit of time. Mm-hmm. Again, so the attacking side of the ball, you can't ask for much more. $13 million striker scoring goals. Zinckernagel, who you brought in for $1 million, which is the biggest bargain in MLS at the moment going. And Joe Bamba, you would love to see more out of him, but clearly a very talented player. So they're fine. They're totally fine at this point in the season, inside the playoff cutoff line in 8th place. I'm good with it as somebody who used to watch this team and knowing what it's looked like in years past. So it's just the Jekyll and Hyde nature of the defensive and attacking side of the ball.
Yeah, I think that's well put. And you talk about having to have some patience about that. This is going to take some time, which I think is absolutely right. Because if we think forward, let's say, you think about how good the Fire are on the road. If the Fire squeak into the playoffs in, 7th, 8th, 9th, somewhere in there, and they're the lower seed in that first round best of 3, if they go on the road and win that opening game of the postseason, they're coming back to Soldier Field or maybe SeatGeek Stadium, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. They're coming home with a win in advance scenario. And, if the Fire finish 8th and they win a home playoff game, yeah, that's a unquestioned success for the season, no matter how you got there. So, yeah, I think perspective is important. Obviously, the biggest thing with the Fire recently is the announcement of the new stadium plans, arrival date roughly 2028. You and I are both familiar with the setups at Soldier Field and SeatGeek Stadium, so I think there's probably from a broadcaster and media perspective, there's things certainly to look forward to. But you also now, you get to be up close and personal living in Cincinnati these days with one of the best new soccer-specific stadiums that's in the U.S. there at TQL. And I think there's probably a lot of things to be learned from how well FC Cincinnati have pulled that off. So I guess just in general, you wear kind of multiple hats here. But what was your reception to that news, and what are you most looking forward to about what we've heard from Joe Mansueto and the Fire?
It's just like utter excitement and utter relief for a city that desperately needed this, right? I mean, you mentioned how I live in Cincinnati now, and like going to TQL and calling games there and now saying that it's a home game, and I'm on the call for Cincinnati and Chicago this weekend. Like, it's such a treat. It is such a treat because it's not only one of the best stadiums in MLS, like this stadium, like, talking to some, people from Borussia Dortmund who are here, obviously for Club World Cup and stuff like that, like they're blown away by TQL. And the stat that always jumps out at me with relation to the Fire is until the training facility opened, the club had never owned a grass field.
Nope.
I'm sorry, but what is that? What is that? No, really. In a city like Chicago, for the soccer team to not own a grass field, that's criminal. It's criminal.
And to be fair, that field at SeatGeek that was technically grass. I think grass might be generous for what the Mount Bridgeview practice field is.
The Fire never owned it. The Fire never owned it. It belonged to the village of Bridgeview, whatever that means. The village, not the town, the village. And it takes a village in order for the Fire to be able to get a grass field, and that village is Joe Mansueto. And I think what he's done with this club. Think about 6.5 years ago, where this club was under Andrew Houtman. Everybody squeezed into SeatGeek, offices, sporting, training, playing, and look where it's at now. Sure, you haven't made the playoffs in that 6.5 years, but the infrastructure and everything else, I mean, it's world class. And like, I know that the winning solves everything. They could be playing at DePaul and in the playoffs 4 out of the last 7 years. And I think Fire fans would be more happy than they are right now with just simply the sporting side. But like, for me, this is everything for Chicago, and it will immediately turn them into one of the premier destinations in Major League Soccer. Immediately.
Yeah.
Immediately. And there's a reason. The
training center's already gone a long way to that. I mean, that's the thing Cincinnati did as well, that now Cincinnati is one of the teams that has that combo.
And I'm already starting to hear, like, for Cincinnati, that some of the biggest teams at the World Cup are looking to use Cincinnati as home base, because that's what having that type of facility can do. And that's what having this type of facility is going to do for Chicago. I could not be more excited for the city. And I'm like already dreaming about being on the call in year 6 or 7 of MLS Season Pass on Apple TV for that opening year of the Chicago Fire, because it's something that the city deserves. It's something not easy, but it's like it makes the most amount of sense to create a community around this team, because this team's support is a community. It's niche. It's not in your face. It's not the Cubs. It's not the Bulls, but it's the Fires. And I think it deserves 22,000 grass field, restaurants and bars in the surrounding area. And like, it is going to make this club pop in a way that it never has in the city, even when it was winning US Open Cups and MLS Cups in its opening years.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That grass field point is so funny, because again, as you and I both know, I've mentioned this on the show before, up until this year, because the U.S. men's national team became the first national team to use the new Fire facility, UIC has been the best grass field in Chicago, and it's where the U.S. men have trained there, the U.S. women have trained there, the Mexican men have trained there, the Argentina men have trained there, and so yeah, it's an entirely different level of investment. And I think it's funny they mentioned the specific type of hybrid grass and synthetic field that I want to say the boast was that they have 2 of them on site at the new training center. There's 8 in the world, and 6 of them are in MLS. I believe TQL is one of those other ones. And so it's just crazy to think that, you assume they're going to put another one in the new stadium. So yeah, so much excitement. It's, the team is better. They're not great, but lots of things headed in the right direction. Tyler, before we get you out of there, just to touch on the soccer one more time, we talked about the Fire being on the line of the playoffs. Do you think they stay there? Do you think this is a playoff team when you look at the way the Eastern Conference is starting to shake its way out?
Kendra and I were sort of having this conversation a little bit with the context of Charlotte being thrown in there and whether or not you would pick Charlotte or Chicago. And I think Kendra said Chicago on air, if I'm not mistaken. There was a chance that happened right as we were trying to get that conversation going. And
no, she did get to that point. I think you guys, something else happened, but I remember it comes up in the highlights from the game that you guys are talking about that right before a goal or something.
Yes, and I do think that they'll get in. Like, I think that the Fire are a better team than New York City. I think that the Fire are probably as good as Red Bulls, maybe even a hint better. But I look at a team like New England who's been on a tear, respective, like in context with their opening first 6 or 7 games of the season. I don't see DC making noise. Toronto stinks. Atlanta stinks. Montreal stinks. So, I do think that there is a very real world in where the Fire can finally qualify for the postseason for the first time in 7 years, and maybe, just maybe, even get out of that wild card game, because I think that's important, and making sure that you're going to immediately find yourself in a 3-game series and give yourself an opportunity in that opening game, whether it's going to be against Philly or Cincy or Nashville. That's a winnable series. If I'm one of those top 3 seeds and I'm looking at the bottom of the playoff picture, Chicago's the last team I want to play. Maybe Red Bulls is right there too, just because of who Red Bulls are. But I don't want to see Philip Zinckernagel in a 3-game series. I don't want to see Ugo Kuipers being opportunistic in a 3-game series. So, I think that there's something, but you have to get some work done on the back line this summer. You have to. And if I'm Greg, I'm sorry, I'm cutting ties with Carlos Terens now. If it's possible, I know he's injured, and you probably can't get rid of him at this point in time. But I would just clear the space and just make it known this position on our team is open for grabs to anybody in Europe or anybody in South America who's willing to fill the spot. I've seen enough as somebody who's covered the team for 3 years as a regional broadcaster and 2.5 now as a national broadcaster. But I've seen enough, and it's just you can't rely on him to be a part of the team anymore. You just can't.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. It's the transfer market is not super hot right now internationally while the Club World Cup's going on, but you can imagine that as soon as that wraps up, it's going to be busy. The Fire, they already tried to sign Kevin De Bruyne, so I'm sure they have more swings to take this summer. As Tyler mentioned, you can hear him on the broadcast again this weekend as the Fire travel down to his adopted home of Cincinnati, Ohio, to take on FC Cincinnati on Saturday night. Tyler Terens, thanks so much for taking the time, coming back on the show. Let's do this again soon.
Absolutely. You've got my number. Always happy to be on here. Have a good one, Alex.
Yep. Thanks, Tyler. Before we keep going with the show, a quick word on some of the folks who make CHGO Fire possible to be the show that it is. First of all, CHGO Fire is brought to you by Cash App. Making money moves should be easy, and that's why there's Cash App. It's fast, safe, and honestly, just way more personalized than the other apps that are out there. No extra hoops to jump through and no extra stress. All the tools are right there to help you cash in. And sending money with Cash App, it actually feels safe because they look out for you. Something seems sketchy or you see that you might be sending money to a potential scammer, they'll warn you, and they'll make you think twice before you hit send. It's like having a personal bodyguard for your cash. You can even spice up your payments with custom texts, stamps, and backgrounds, because why should paying your friend for brunch be so boring? If for whatever reason you don't already have Cash App, just download it from your phone's app store, sign up, and enter the code CHGOFIRE in your profile, and then send $5 to a friend, and you'll get $10 just for getting started. Thank you again to Cash App. And as a reminder, CHGO Fire is presented by Sunnyside. Sunnyside Cannabis Dispensary is your home for judgment-free cannabis shopping. It's a place where all kinds of visitors are welcome to explore, discover, and purchase a wide array of high-quality products. They've got everything you need to elevate your summer. Sunnyside is a one-stop shop for all your cannabis needs with an expertly curated menu, over 100 strains to choose from, and easy online ordering combined with in-store pickup. Sunnyside is Illinois' favorite cannabis dispensary with locations both here in the city and in the suburbs and across the state. If you're just starting out, Sunnyside has expert guidance and brands they know you'll love, like Good News and Molly's. Or if you're a pro, they've got you covered with that diverse menu of over 100 strains. New ones are being added daily. They know you'll love Cresco and Florical's incredible high quality and consistent products. So visit Sunnyside.shop for bright buys every day, including 50% off your first 3 online purchases. Enter promo code HICHGO at checkout to qualify. Exclusions apply. Sunnyside Cannabis Dispensary. Bright buys every day, only for 21 plus and Illinois medical card holders. And a reminder for existing users, you can use promo code CHGO50, that's CHGO50, for 50% off one Cresco Labs branded item. All right, let's get to the soccer the Fire played since our last show. There have been 3 games, all at Soldier Field, and it's been a pretty relatable mixed bag because that's how this Fire season has gone. The first one was hosting Nashville SC, a rematch of that 7-2 drubbing that the Fire took earlier in the season. The Fire were also coming off that 7-1 win against DC United, so you would have thought, hey, maybe we're going to see fireworks, lots of goals. Not so much. The Fire lose this game 2-0. There's not a whole lot to say about this game. It was 0-0 at the half. Nashville are playing some really, really great soccer right now. BJ Callahan, I think, is the runaway leader for MLS Coach of the Year in my mind at this stage. That's with all due respect to everything going on in Philadelphia. I just think, in terms of the gap between expectations and what's happened, you got to just say that Callahan's done a fantastic job. The second game of this homestand was against the Philadelphia Union, and the Fire went into this game as heavy favorites despite the fact that Philly are top of the table because Philly were missing 7 starters, and some of the adjustments they made included having Alejandro Bedoya, who I believe is now 38 years old, playing out of position at right back. This was a team of bench guys. There was a couple MLS Next Pro players in the 18 for Philly. This should have been a Fire win. They were coming off that week and a half break. They basically had their full strength 11 available, and they lose this game 1-0. Philly came out flying in this game, and, clearly these guys had a point to prove and that they're trying to earn more minutes. They get an early penalty via a pretty lazy Andrew Gutman handball. For as good as Gutman's been this year, he was not good in this game. And the first half of this game was maybe the worst soccer the Fire have played all season. And yes, I am including that Nashville game in the 2 halves of it in contention because obviously, giving up 7 goals in a game is terrible, but first half of this Philly game, the Fire could not complete a 10-yard pass. I mean, everybody was bad. It was really just didn't make any sense. And once Philly had the lead, they went into a shell. They didn't get a shot on goal the rest of the game because they knew what they came there to do. They knew they were depleted, and they managed to work their way through this game, grind out a win, and that's why a team like them is currently top of the table in the Eastern Conference. Leonardo Barroso came back into the starting 11 for this game. I thought he was really bad, despite the fact that he then was awarded a man of the match on FotMob for having the highest player rating, which kind of goes to show you what kind of game this was. He had a couple nice moments, some nice dribbles, and I want him to, the point Tyler Terens made earlier in the show, want him to get a bigger run of games so that he can try to find some consistency. But then we see him not play this past weekend against Charlotte, and so that continues to be a bit on hold for now. As I mentioned, worst game of the year for Gutman. The midfield of Pineda, Orihel, Gutierrez, none of those guys were good. Kuipers basically wasn't involved. The closest the Fire came to scoring is I think Zinckernagel hit the crossbar with a really speculative curling shot, and even the amazing form he brought into this game could not help the Fire, so they dropped back-to-back games at home. And then this past weekend, they were able to barely salvage something from this group of home games. Fire 3, Charlotte 2. The Fire were the better team pretty much from the jump in this game. Charlotte in their 2 games against the Fire have looked just terrible, just generally speaking. Fire take advantage early, though, of being better, and it was great to see this sort of energy right out of the gate. Philip Zinckernagel in the 23rd minute goes on a phenomenal solo run down the right side and ends up just blasting a ball through Christian Kalina in the Charlotte goal. Zinckernagle's 8th of the season, coming off, of course, the announcement that he's an MLS All Star, and that's going to be super exciting. He's very, very deserving, and it's really cool to see that around the league he is developing this reputation as such a key addition. As Tyler mentioned, only a $1 million fee to get him from Bodo Glimt over across the pond. Or I guess technically I think he came from Club Brugge, having made his name mostly with Bodo Glimt. So he's been an awesome addition. He then gets the noisiest of assists on the Fire's second goal. It's Brian Gutierrez who scores it with the help of a just massive deflection. Zinckernagel, with that assist, becomes the fastest player in Fire history to get to 8 goals and 8 assists for the club after joining them. And I think that's just a really well-deserved accolade at this point for him. He's been awesome. And then the Fire get gifted the third goal. This is in the 33rd minute for Ugo Kuipers. Malanda, the Charlotte center back, tries to pass it back to Kalina and hits this really weak no-look back pass. And in stride, Kuipers taps it in. Like, he doesn't take a setup touch. It just goes right onto Kuipers' right foot. First touch, passes it in past Kalina, who's helpless. 3-0. Game feels over, but it wasn't because the Fire can't make things that easy. Charlotte score in the 56th and 59th minutes to get back in this game. And, I mean, I'm not going to be the first person to say this, but Jay Davila, oh, man. You talk about Zinckernagel as a great value for money signing. Jay Davila has so far been the opposite of that. Fire paid nearly $5 million for the lanky, young Ivorian midfielder from Portugal. And he's just been awful. I know he's young. I know he's probably still getting used to, his body and his height and, his athleticism maybe still catching up with his tools. But, on both these goals, you see him just do these little trots in a small circle. The first one in particular, he's not marking anybody. He's not really even marking space. And again, I know that the only way he's going to get better is by playing. But at this point, I think you've got to put Sam Williams ahead of him in the pecking order, because Sam's not going to do anything flashy, but he's going to be well positioned. He's going to get stuck in, and he's going to at least help you lock things down defensively in a way that Davila just doesn't. And we certainly haven't seen anything from Davila on the offensive end to make up for his defensive shortcomings. So we're just going to have to wait and see. Fire now go on a bit of a brief road trip that starts, as we mentioned, with heading down to Cincinnati this weekend. Cincinnati, one of those teams that's really, really good, but maybe not as consistent as they'd like to be. Of course, you'll remember the last time the Fire played Cincinnati, they scored 3 goals against the Fire, and 2 of them were ridiculous because one of them involved the referee committing a yellow card challenge on Mauricio Pineda. So hopefully this weekend's game will be free of any nonsense like that. Before we get to more Fire soccer this weekend, though, we have more podcasts today. So if you are watching on YouTube, we ask that if you could click over to the CHGO Stars stream that's going to get fired up here shortly. Joe Chats is going to join me to talk about what's just been a massive news dump of a day in Bridgeview. And then if you're listening wherever you get your podcast, please go subscribe to that show as well. That is going to do it, though, for this episode of CHGO Fire. A thank you again to Tyler Terens for taking the time out of his crazy schedule to jump on the show and talk shop. A thank you to Sean Anderson behind the scenes for making this show go. A thank you to you for tuning in live or listening wherever you are. Always much appreciated. I'm Alex Campbell, and I'll see you next time on CHGO Fire.
We all silly like the mayor.